With that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our speakers for today's presentation. We are joined by Frank Agurto Machado from Symantec and John Hergenrather from MarkMonitor. Frank started at VeriSign supporting SSL products and has moved through the different teams supporting products from end user, code signing, SSL, and enterprise level management. He has supported affiliates and partners and large-scale partnerships with hybrid-level enterprises, such as SMB to super enterprise. Frank has 15-plus years in the network/PKI industry. He is currently the Trust Services Primary Systems Engineer for their enterprise SSL products, from SSL discovery to secure application signing. John has been with MarkMonitor since April 2006, and in the last 10 years has grown from his initial responsibilities as Domain Client Services Manager and Level 2 technical support to incorporate several additional responsibilities, including managing the SSL certificate business and providing internal-facing technical training on DNS and SSL. John's deep understanding of DNS and SSL allows him to effectively communicate the more intricate composition of these complex mechanisms, and in doing so, aids the entire team to work more effectively. So with that, I'll go ahead and turn things over to John to get us started.
Thanks, Gina. Hi, everyone. Just to give you a heads up here at the very beginning, our agenda today is basically to go through and give you a high-level overview of SSL certificates and how it relates to your business, talking about some benefits, and then looking at making specific kinds of choices for the right SSL that you might need, and then a few best practices at the end to go ahead and give you a couple of tips and tricks that will bring you some benefit. So starting off, what is SSL? Let's take a look at it and how it works. SSL stands for Secure Socket Layer. It is used in web browsers and instant messaging programs, email clients, and other software. It establishes an encrypted session between two machines. Most frequently, it's going to be between a browser and a website. And before we go too much further, I wanted to talk about a couple of terms that we'll be utilizing today, and I want to make sure that we've got a base understanding to get started with. So a CSR is a certificate signing request, and it's a block of encrypted text that is generated on the server that the certificate will be used on. So that is something that clients, a network administrator, enterprise administrator is going to go through and generate, and it is taking the key pair, which is a combination of the public key and private key. Those are generated on the server you wish to protect. The public key is present in the final cert for everyone to encrypt messages to you, and only the private key on the server can decrypt them. So utilizing your key pair, as well as the particular information that you're looking to have included in your SSL certificate, those two combined make up the certificate signing request. Moving on a little bit further, we've got a CA, which is a certificate authority. And a certificate authority is a trusted entity that issues electronic documents that verify a digital entity's identity on the internet. An example would be Symantec, who we have chosen to partner with here at MarkMonitor. And what happens is, we'll get to it a little bit more, but you take that CSR that you've created off of your particular server and you send it to that certificate authority for validation, and that happens, at least here at MarkMonitor, through our portal. Then we've got two others to mention here, SAN, which stands for Subject Alternative Name, and UCC, which is a Unified Communications Certificate. And basically, we kind of utilize these two terms interchangeably, and the idea is that you can have one certificate that covers multiple host names, including from multiple domain names. to have those protected in a single SSL certificate. It ends up making things much easier in the long run for managing your SSL certs because you don't have as many individuals that you have to worry about their expiration dates and how things are covered, who's managing that particular. By combining many of them together into a single SSL certificate, it's really going to aid you in being able to manage and work with those in the future. Do you have anything to add to that, Frank?
Sure. Thanks, John. So try to look at SAN is more at the higher level of what we support by a standards perspective under X509 version 3, which is the kind of the general black and white PKI standards of how certificates should look, etc. UCC falls in there and does require SAN to do some things as well from a public CA perspective where I live at in Symantec. But think of it, you'll hear me use this a lot during the web seminar, is think of it with a driver's license with all your aliases on it. So I'm www.frank.com and also I'm on www.francisco.com and things like that. So think of it as, again, as a credential with multiple names or aliases on it that can be all utilized and are legitimate, is the way I put it.
Fantastic.
So I'll hand it back to you, John.
There we go. So how does SSL work? SSL certificates use a public key infrastructure, which is also shortened as PKI. It's a cryptographic system which consists of the two keys, the public key known to everyone and used to encrypt, as we mentioned, and the private or secret key known only to the organization that procured the SSL cert, and that's used to decrypt information that is sent. They work together to establish that encrypted connection. The process for that, the SSL certificates are issued from a public certification authority, and then the CSR administrator will install it at the organization's web server. A little bit more info on that. Actually, Frank, if you could go ahead and talk about this one. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure. Thanks, John. So once again, extrapolating on what John is saying about how SSL works, the kind of the bread and butter of what makes an SSL session is what we call the handshake. And you'll hear that a lot, especially from the propeller heads like John and myself that deal with this regularly. You hear always, what's happening at the handshake, or I need to see a log file or something like that. But, that kind of can see or sniff what a handshake is doing. But the handshake is where there's always a server and a client. And I won't go into a lot of detail here to save you kind of the boring details of it, I guess. But there's always about a client and a server. It doesn't matter what the devices are at each end, but someone's always the host. Someone's always coming in wanting to talk to them. And so when you kind of work your way down this handshake, it's I as a client am going to order something off my local sales site, or I'm going to my bank to check on a loan or my account or whatever I'm doing, but I have to make contact with that server, and I have to say, hey, look, I want to talk to you securely. Could be pressing my login button, whatever it is. And after that, the server is going to say, yeah, sure, tell me what you can do. Oh, by the way, while you're doing all that, here's my credentials so you know who you're talking to is really a server at Bank of America or Amazon or whatever I'm doing at that point through a secure connection. And then what happens is I look at that credential, and there's something that I have on my computer or system that's called a root CA, or a certificate authority. That root CA says, look, you can trust that, what they call a certificate, coming from that server, because it's a public key, by the way, that I have in my browser or my what they call an operating system root store, but I trust it is the bottom line, right? And so it's legitimate. We can do this SSL session, and as you work your way down, there's some other things that are happening. There's secret codes being created between the client and the server, and they're saying, look, anytime I send you something that's garbled or encrypted, you can use this little code book to decrypt that data. And we're on the same page. Me as the client, the server over there, we can decrypt that data to each other, those messages that go within that tunnel. And at the very end of it, the server gives a message. Let's prove it. Here's everything you did with me that's encrypted. If you can decrypt it with those special codes we created, then we're doing SSL. And that's at the speed of the Internet, because by then, you've already logged into your website. You're ordering those cool little things from Amazon or whatever. You're checking your bank account to see how much money you have in there, whatever's going on. But the bottom line is that handshake is the bread and butter of that SSL session. It's what makes the SSL session because of that one key word that I said earlier, the root, right? the roots are handed out by public CAs way ahead of time. Take Symantec as an example. Even in my days at VeriSign, we always, for the lack of better terms, parked our roots in the industry very, very early on. And so sometimes you'll see our roots expire very late, 2028, 2036, but you'll see their start dates in the late 90s sometimes. And again, just as the industry changes, you find we have to put new roots out there. But the bottom line is, this whole portion of the session we call the handshake, it's extremely important that it has to happen, because that's where all the mathematical computations happen to say, look, I can trust you as a server sitting in this ecosystem or enterprise, and then we can do secure communications together. Okay? So I'll keep it, that's kind of my 40,000-foot spiel that I'll give you on handshaking, but the key to get from this slide is that the handshaking is extremely important. And what makes that important is that ubiquity, or that root CA being everywhere, meaning on mobile devices, computer systems, whether they're mobile or desktop computing systems, tablets, wearable tech, most anything today that can participate when a secure communication is in some way, shape, or form going to carry a root CA from Symantec and maybe even other vendors. I'll hand it back to you, John.
Sure. Thank you very much. And something to go through and add to that is the basis of this is truly about trust. Trust is that one word. If there's anything at all that I could communicate to all of you today, it is that the trust is really what we're talking about. And so if you go to johnswidgets.com and you're going to purchase some new widget, how do I know and understand that my information is secure and not able to be read by anyone else? I've never been to John's Widgets before, so I don't know them. So what I can do is I trust that my browser is only going to include those root certificates for trustworthy companies. And so the browser then works with those public certificate authorities to include those root certificates within the browsers. And so I may not know John's Widgets, but then I can look at it and see that there is an SSL Cert for John's Widgets that is signed, say, by Symantec's root certificate. I don't know John's Widgets. I trust my browser, and my browser trusts the root certificate from Symantec. And so through that path, I have established a line of trust between myself and that site, that the data between us is encrypted. And so that's kind of what I wanted to say next in going forward as we look at this secure connection and talk a little bit there about the trust. So moving forward, looking at why SSL, realistically, it's in the news almost every day. The number of hacked accounts or stolen credit cards or identity theft that's happening. And your customers, the end users there on the internet, they're very concerned about that. So do you need SSL? Well, realistically, you need SSL if any of these are applying to you. The sites that require a login or personal information, domains being used as email or name servers, e-commerce sites, online banking, VPN access, database and application servers, and anytime you're transmitting the following sensitive information, like social security numbers or personal information or login credentials. In any of those circumstances, you want to know that this information cannot be read in plain text by anyone out there on the internet, that instead that it is encrypted and it only goes to that destination, who it is that you're trying to interact with. You need it for other reasons too. I'd mentioned trust. Realistically, your site visitors, your customers, they feel safe when they know that their information is encrypted and secure between you and them. To maximize your potential, visitors will choose not to browse your website if it isn't secure. Search engines have also started penalizing rankings of websites that aren't protected by SSL. So in order to maximize the potential of your website or online business, SSL is really necessary. And then also for preparing for the future, non-secure sites are being phased out as more and more websites are utilizing SSL. In fact, I was at a conference recently, and one of the things that was brought up is that the United States government has mandated that if you are doing business with a .gov website, that by the end of 2016, all .gov websites must utilize SSL for that encryption to ensure that there is nothing unencrypted happening between a .gov website and the public. So there's definitely an increasing need, and we're ramping that up as we look at SSL industry-wide, all the way across through the internet. So a couple of examples of what you see here. We've got HTTPS www.markmonitor.com. This is our website, and the same for Symantec. And as we look at these, you see that the address bar is green. We'll talk about that a little more in a few minutes. But anytime you have the HTTPS, that is indicating that you are requesting an encrypted conversation, that you are requesting to handle that transaction between an end user site, a browser, and a particular website. And then here's an example of what it can look like if it's not a secured. This particular is a buddy of mine that is hosting webmail for me and my family, and he has used a self-signed certificate, which, because I know and trust him as my friend, he was looking for that encryption piece, but it's not a publicly facing, so he's not trying to prove trust to anyone else. I already have that trust relationship established, and so in this case, utilizing that self-signed cert meets the encryption requirement, but it also then throws errors in my browser because my browser does not recognize that as a trusted certificate. It's not coming from a trusted certificate authority. So then we move on to where do you start? Okay, cool. We've got an idea. I need SSL, and I'm convinced of that, okay, we need to move forward with this, but there's a lot of different SSL options out there. So as I mentioned, my friend with that mail server is utilizing a self-signed certificate. It's not issued by an established trusted certificate authority. So the very first thing that you want to start with is you need to ensure that it is issued by an established trusted certificate authority, because that is what is going to be supported by the browser and bring about that chain of trust from you to your browser to the certificate authority that issued it to the website that was validated. So a couple of examples, Symantec, DigiCert, Komodo. Just to talk, these are some of the larger SSL providers and certificate authorities that exist out there. So when we talk about Symantec SSL certificates, they have a global reach. They're compatible with every major browser. They maintain the most strict validation processes for OV and EV certificates. Now, an OV certificate would be an organization-validated certificate, meaning that they are validating the ownership of the domain name and that that company is who they claim to be. We'll talk a little more about the EV, or Enhanced Validation Certificate, in a moment. But the Symantec SSL Cert offerings include three major brand names. We've got, I'm sorry, go ahead, Frank.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. No, I was kicking something, actually. But I can add in here if you'd like. That brings up some good points regardless. So think of, John's hitting some really great points about just wipe away public certification authorities like Symantec and other vendors, even our daughter vendors, GeoTrust and Thought. There's obviously the security model, the cybersecurity model is extremely vast, right? There's more than one piece that makes it, because John brought up a great point earlier with his friend's email server where it was showing it wasn't trusted, but if his friend gave him his private root and said, hey, look, go ahead and add it in here, it'll work, and okay, great. And that's all fine and dandy. His browser would more than likely trust it. But what if John's friend created that root on a server in his basement that really had no firewall or anything on it to protect it? Had the internet user enabled and kind of just a plain old Windows server just sitting out there just waiting to be compromised. If something happens to his friend's server and you have the root in your browser, guess what? You're still touching an SSL certificate that potentially could be copied by someone with malicious intent. So what I'm getting at in the big scheme of things is SSL is a very small link. Maybe it's the iron link in the chain, but if it breaks, obviously everything goes crazy. But it's just a bigger reminder of what I like to say with that is it's the bigger reminder of how important the cybersecurity model is. It's not just SSL. PKI is all about math, and the math never lies. It's there and it does what it's supposed to do, but there's so much more you have to worry about: malware, antivirus, even things that kind of change those borderlines between malware and antivirus, like Trojans and worms and things like that. So it's a reminder that, yeah, you're absolutely important in what you're selling to your customer with cybersecurity, but it's one link in the bigger chain, right? And again, we're just an extremely important link, right, with the SSL certificate. So anyway, I wanted to add that in there, and I don't want to take too much away from what you're doing, John. So, but again, the OV and EV certificates, you'll find how we offer them, and that's the beauty of it is that the customers have options. So it is about the authentication services that we provide. I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
No, fantastic. So just to let you guys know, under the Symantec umbrella, we've got Symantec as a brand, GeoTrust as a brand, and Thought as a brand. Mark Monitor actually partnered with GeoTrust way back in 2005 to start providing SSL certificates. And then it was 2008 or 2009, GeoTrust was acquired by VeriSign. And then a couple of years later, that VeriSign website security business was acquired by Symantec. And we have continued a very fruitful relationship over the years. And then Thought is that additional brand that came into that mix. It is more widely known and utilized within the EMEA area, but it's another one of those brand choices to be able to provide. So I mentioned we'd come back to the EV standard, or extended validation standard. It is the most stringent validation criteria. So when a certificate authority is authenticating the information, when you apply for an EV cert, they're going to look at the domain ownership and the organizational identity, including the business registration number, trying to find information about that company. They're also going to go through and validate the individual approver's employment. So the person that actually requested the SSL cert from your company, their employment is going to be validated. A call will be made to the HR department and actually ask, is this person still an employee at your company, and are they authorized to request SSL certificates on behalf of your company? So it's one of those additional levels of validation to go through and say, hey, we're checking and we're making sure that you don't have somebody that is acting as a bad actor. Maybe a disgruntled former employee that's going through and trying to get an SSL certificate to be able to move forward on their own and do something malicious with your company's brand. So that additional information is being validated. One of the other things that they're going to do is validate that the organization is older than 3 years. If your company's been in business for less than 3 years, you're actually not eligible to obtain an EV SSL certificate. So it keeps somebody from being able to start up a fresh company and then obtain some SSL certificates for it, go out of business, use them maliciously, and then start up another company, a few weeks later, and be able to repeat that kind of a process. The organization needs to have been around for at least 3 years in order to be eligible for an EV cert. And then they're also going to check that the common name of the SSL cert or the organization requesting it is not on a list of denied countries or blacklists or known phishing lists. So the EV standard really is going above and beyond, and that was the address bar that I showed you a few minutes ago that was green around www.markmonitor or www.symantec.com. That green address bar is a visual indicator to you to state this company has done everything that they can do to prove to you that you can trust this interaction. We've gone through the most stringent requirements for an SSL certificate to say, hey, we really take the security of this data seriously, and we're doing everything that we can to prove to you that we have validated this information completely. So, you know, the EV, it's the pinnacle to proving to end users that it can be trusted. The green address bar, 93% of users prefer to shop on sites with EV certs. This is something that's been shown throughout Symantec's extensive testing, doing a variety of blind testing and validation to see what people are looking for and what they notice. So when you've got that green address bar, like I said, it's that visual indicator to let you know, it's okay for me to put my credit card information in here. Nobody else other than the company that I'm talking to is going to be able to see that. And EV is supported by all browsers out there. So when it comes to choosing and validating exactly what kind of an SSL certificate you're going to utilize, what do we need? The first question that I really start with regarding this kind of a choice is it an internal or an external facing site that we're going to be utilizing this on? Is it a marquee branded site? Is it customer facing? Are you collecting personal information? Can the data being transmitted be used against you or your customers? Is the site prone to phishing attacks? Do you need SAN values? So these are the kind of questions that we work through. But the first and foremost is that internal or external facing for the SSL cert. If it is an internal facing, kind of like what I talked about with my buddy's mail server, it's encrypting the data, but the trust isn't necessarily having to be communicated to quite that level. So in a circumstance like that, we oftentimes will recommend a GeoTrust Quick SSL Premium because it is a less expensive and lower cost that you can utilize then in those internal facing scenarios. But if it's an external facing site and you are collecting passwords, login and password information, if it's an e-commerce site where you're going to collect credit card information from clients and things like that, then in those circumstances we really do recommend going with the EV cert because that's going to communicate that trust and give that bright visual indicator to your end users. So mentioned that Quick SSL Premium, realistically, if you're concerned with cost above anything else, it's a domain vetting process. What happens is you look, you submit the request and an email will be sent to one of the email addresses listed on your Whois record to say, hey, your email address is on this Whois record, so therefore you have some kind of a relationship with this domain name. An SSL cert was just requested for this domain name or a host name subset of that. Are you authorizing this? Is this a legitimate request? So because of that, you really have a very fast turnaround once you as the requester click on the link in the email you receive and approve that SSL certificate. One of the other things to note is that the GeoTrust branded line is an unlimited server licensing arrangement as opposed to a per server licensing arrangement. So as you think about it, we can't just go in and buy a single copy of Microsoft Office and put it on all of the computers in our company's systems. You need to purchase an individual license for Microsoft Office for every user in your company that's going to be utilizing it on those systems. In the case of the Thought and Symantec branded, that is the licensing model of that. So for each server that you are going to be placing that on, you need to purchase an SSL cert for each of those servers. With the GeoTrust branded SSL certs, you can take that same cert and install it on multiple servers and still be licensing compliant. Something to particularly take note of. Then when we talk about the external facing SSL certs, realistically, the better, the pinnacle, the high end of that would be the Symantec Secure Site with EV or a Symantec Secure Site Pro. It openly shows that security to the users in the green address bar. You want to use that for your main brand sites, e-commerce sites, things that might be prone to phishing attacks. And when you utilize that, you get the Norton Secured Seal. And that's something that you can place on your website. And it is an additional visual indicator to communicate to your users that this information is encrypted. And in fact, you can click on that site seal and a verification page opens containing information about the organization, the status of their malware scans, the SSL certificate details. So additional pieces of information to help provide peace of mind and, once again, continue to push that trust concept to your end users. And the Norton Secured Seal is something that Symantec has spent many years and a lot of money in promoting and working with and doing studies to go through and show how effective that is, that when customers and end users see that, it helps to continue to build that trust in that information. Do you have anything else to add on that, Frank?
No, you're pretty much hitting the nail on the head. I think the key to remember, and you don't have to go back a slide, but on a couple of slides back, John had talked about internal and external facing. Always remember that with SSL certs, appreciate that. With SSL certs, especially in the Symantec side of the house, of course, where I live at, I always look at it as we service the three basic infrastructures of the web, right? Your intranets, your internets, and your extranets, right? Or internet and extranets. It's always kind of, maybe sometimes if that helps, it's always kind of come in it from that aspect, and again, internal or external facing. But the key point, really, at the end of the day, is anything that you're doing is, can that data be transmitted, the data being transmitted or being sent over, is that something that can get used against you or your customer? That's really that bottom line, right? Because and then the other stuff just kind of, not necessarily in the same order, but that other stuff, quote unquote, just kind of stems out from there, right? Because then, if the customer doesn't bring that up to you and you're bringing it up to the customer, you're absolutely going to start getting their juices flowing when it comes to the kind of certificates that I should buy. And again, and it starts helping you as the rep to control it, right? To say, okay, here's kind of how we're going to look at it from a cost perspective, what makes sense. And John, again, has some great points about, and if it's internal, maybe we can look at lower costs, because at the end of the day, when you deal with PKI from providers, what I like to call PKI as a service, is not necessarily being housed inside the core enterprise infrastructure. It's being housed by a software as a service, like what we operate as a Symantec. Then really what you start getting into is you start looking at, it's not so much that certificate, because industry standards say they all have to look the same. It's how is it being authenticated, and John hit those points as well. If it's an internal cert, maybe domain validation is enough. Maybe I don't need to have the organizational and all the other high-end validation services that can increase the cost of the certificate. Maybe sometimes just domain validation will do it. So you absolutely want to keep an open mind to that with customers. And at the same time, is that something, to the customer, is that something that they're okay with? Because their internal use policy might dictate something different. So again, it's kind of this. Sometimes it's just kind of working on a curve to get to that even flow of what the customer is looking for. But again, obviously the great thing here is that you have options, is where I wanted to go with that. Thanks, John. That kind of adds my point.
Thanks, Greg. And then, moving on, what about hosting multiple domains on a single server? So I mentioned a little bit about SAN earlier. The GeoTrust True Business ID with SAN values would be the GeoTrust branded that we can do. We also have the Symantec Secure Site and Secure Site Pro. Those can also be done with additional SAN values. You can have up to 99 additional SAN values included with that SSL certificate. They don't need to be of the same domain name, but the ownership is still going to be validated. So each one of those names that gets included as a SAN value is going to go through the same validation process as the original common name. And then each additional SAN value adds to the cost of that cert. There's also a GeoTrust True Business ID wildcard. That cert provides unlimited number of subdomains on a single server. So it's easier to manage than 5 or more quick SSL single certs. It's also, and both of these are considered OV, or organization validated SSL certs. So we've got, a variety of certs realistically, and we've got a chart if you would like more information on exactly what those are. Really, the point of this particular webinar was not to do a sales kind of thing. I'm not trying to sell you a particular cert. It's more of an education about SSL and how it applies to your business. And if you've got additional questions, please reach out to your client services manager, and we would be happy to provide you that. But that's not really the focus of what we're trying to accomplish here at the moment. So, the rough overview of the cert process is your website administrator is going to generate the certificate signing request on the server that they'd like to have protected. In our process, it would go through MarkMonitor and our domain portal, and we will send that request off to Symantec as our partner, and they will go through and validate the information and return a final SSL certificate, and then your website administrator would go through and install that cert on the machine that you're wanting to protect. So a couple of other expert tips and best practices. Really utilizing a management solution that allows for quick and secure ordering. I know that one of the biggest things that we do run into is that things will get lost in between the cracks as an SSL cert comes close to expiration, and hey, we need a quick turnaround on this. This cert expires in 2 or 3 days, and we need to get this turned around. Can you help us out with that? The ability to centrally manage the certs and the domains with a single secure online environment, ensuring visibility into your issued certs and tracking expiration dates, because that can be a challenge for sure to go through. And when we talk about a large enterprise, like many of you as our clients are, there are, in some cases hundreds and maybe even thousands of SSL certificates across your domain portfolio and throughout your enterprise. So the ability to keep track of all of the different certs that you have and when they expire, and to receive reminders to let you know, hey, this cert's coming up for expiration in the next 30 days or 60 days or 90 days. That's important for you to be able to track that, so you don't have a cert expire and then get that untrusted icon and warning to show up when a client an end user tries to access your site. One of the other particular best practices is if you work to ensure consistency between the domain name ownership, as in what shows up on the WHOIS, the organization that is listed within your CSR, and the requesting organization when you're filling out the order form to request this cert. If you've got consistency between those three, then you're really going a long way and making it easy for the certificate authority to validate that information. They don't have to work as hard. They don't have to send additional emails or gain additional approvals because there are differences. If you keep that consistency there between those pieces, it helps that order to go through very quickly and smoothly because it's easy to validate. I see that this is MarkMonitor Inc. listed on the WHOIS. It's MarkMonitor Inc. listed as the owner within the CSR, and it's MarkMonitor Inc. that is actually requesting this cert. So because of that consistency, it's really easy to validate, hey, it's MarkMonitor Inc. across the board, fantastic, one validation, quick and easy, and it's done, and we can get that cert issued. And then the last particular piece here was never giving out the private key. We've had instances before where when we receive a CSR from a client to go through and make a request to get them an SSL cert, that they will send us the CSR as well as the public and private key. And in circumstances like that, we turn around and email back and say, you've given out your private key. It's no longer private. It exists out there. It's been transmitted through the internet, and it was not encrypted as it was transmitted through that email. So in that circumstance, please go back and recreate your key pair and never pass your private key along to anyone outside your organization. Create a new CSR from that key pair, send us just that CSR, and we can go ahead and get that SSL cert processed for you. So that's a big security thing in particular to keep in mind. And then one of the other things, didn't necessarily have it as a slide, but I did want to mention a concept called certificate transparency. And certificate transparency is a relatively newer concept. If you're really technically inclined and you want to go out and look and read more about it, RFC 6962 is the RFC, the document, basically kind of the rules of the internet and how things function. But certificate transparency provides an open framework for monitoring and auditing SSL certificates in near real time. Specifically, it makes it possible to detect SSL certificates that may have been mistakenly issued by a certificate authority or maliciously acquired from an otherwise impeachable certificate authority. It also makes it possible to identify certificate authorities that may have gone rogue and are maliciously issuing certs. So, as Frank mentioned earlier, there was a certificate authority that he had mentioned that is not trusted, does not have their root certificate in the browsers any longer because they were not following the guidelines of the CAB forum. CAB forum is the Certificate Authority / Browser Forum, and it is an industry group of the various certificate authorities that are issuing certs and the browsers, and it's those two groups coming together to work to establish the guidelines that will be used for issuing SSL certificates and having those trusted by the browsers. So certificate transparency is that extra that you can utilize to see what certs have been issued off of our domain names, and then, hey, that's not right, that's not authorized, that's not a part of what we're doing. You can identify that and work to get those taken care of and shut down. Anything else to add on that, Frank?
No, those are great points. Again, you know, hitting the nail on the head there. I think certificate transparency we all need to be aware of. It's not going away. Some things are optional, but when you see out there, they're not necessarily things that have to be added into the certificate, but they are optional functions in the industry. CT is one of those functions that if you're using Google Chrome today, will have reflection of certificates participating in that, right? And those, again, without getting into the low-level details, it is a way of additional trust to say, look, without a doubt, the certificate is from Symantec. You can trust it, or it's from this vendor or whoever it's doing it. But predominantly it applies to public trust. That's the key to remember. Public trust is, again, it goes back to that root. Those roots are disseminated out into the industry in browsers and wearable tech and all kinds of doodads and things like that that can do PKI will carry those roots in them. That's public trust. And the nice thing about PKI is the terms mean what they say. So, again, private keys are exactly that. They remain private. Public keys are exactly that. You want everybody to have that public key because then you know it's trusted and things like that. But, again, these points we're making about CT and things that they are not going away. They are sticking to the industry. At the end of the day, it's about protecting the consumer, right, and protecting the company that's issuing those certificates. So it's all about that, like John said at the beginning, the non-repudiation of trust. That's really what all this is about when you wipe away all the jargon and the terms. It's all about non-repudiation of trust. Without a doubt, I can trust you are who you say you are, and it's just the way that I'm getting to that point, that from point A to point B, it's the way I'm getting to point B, which provides that non-repudiation of trust. So I want to just kind of add that in there as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So just kind of in a wrap-up here, you know, we're leading the way. MarkMonitor and Symantec, these are two companies that are trusted industry leaders. We go through and we are working to protect your data, your information, your brand as you work out there on the internet. And we're committed to leading the way in website security. That's really what we're doing, and the point of this conversation is just to talk a little bit more about website security and things that we can do to make the internet safer for all of us. So just wanted to show this really quick. This was just a quick snapshot of within our portal of what you've got for dealing with individual details. And one of the reasons that I wanted to bring this up is because we have recently completed a project to include the automation of SAN values, subject alternative names, to be able to add those in. We do have that as an automated, and then the ability to reissue one of those certs that you could do as our client directly from the portal without having to email your client services manager. It's something that you could go through and do. Now, unfortunately, because it was a point in time that we did implement this, it works for certs that were ordered after the middle of May of 2016 going forward. So certs that were ordered and completed in our portal prior to that time frame won't have these two green buttons to reissue the certificate or add SAN values. That won't show up. But if it was ordered after that time and you want to do a reissue, that's something that you can go through and do in an automated fashion from within the portal. And then we will move on from there into the Q&A section. And Gina, if you could go ahead and get us started in that direction.
Sure. Just as a reminder, if you have any questions, just submit them via the Q&A tab located on your screen. So the first question, does the public CA, someone like Symantec, keep the server private and public key?
If you don't mind, Gina, I'll take a stab at that, if that's okay, John. I'll go take a stab at that one. So the quick answer is no, and I think John had a great point earlier on in the conversation, is that, of course, the private key should always stay private, right? You really don't want to disseminate it anywhere outside of your enterprise, obviously. John made some great points from a support perspective that, you know, if you're ever working with a support team and they say, look, just take my whole key pair and just try to help me with it, then they're going to come back with probably some stark recommendations that, look, since you gave that to me over public email, you should really think about just going with a new one. Will I help you troubleshoot and fix the problem? Absolutely. But at the very end of this, you should be getting another key pair and putting that on your production or your test web server, wherever it is, because of the fact that it went over public lines. So the quick answer is no, the public CA should never, ever be asking you for that private key. Now, in my support days, do I remember asking for customers for their key pair? Yes, but it was always with the expectation, we're at a point where I just can't fix it any other way. So at this point, let me look at your key pair, and at the very end of this conversation, you're going to revoke it or replace it and get a brand new one at this point, because we have to look at the key pair now because this case has been escalated or whatever it is, right? So public CAs, but generally, they will never ask you for that key pair. They can see your public key all day long, and sometimes we'll just ask for it, but or the CSR even in some cases. But we should, a public CA should, or any organization outside of yours should never really be asking to see that private key. That remains private, stays on your server, or any kind of key protection facility that you may have in your ecosystem. Okay.
Great. So we actually have a follow-up. Should the enterprise have a backup of their key pair?
Sure, and if you're okay, John, I'll just kind of stay on there since I already answered the first one. Yeah, the answer is yes, absolutely. You should. We always recommend, from the Symantec best PKI practices perspective, the very black and white model. And again, remember I said in the beginning, that kind of pie-in-the-sky silver lining, that black and white model we always try to adhere to. The quick answer is yes, you should have at least one backup of every key pair that you distribute into your ecosystem. And once again, that key pair can be kept on a secure thumb drive or whatever, secure media. If you have put it on my HSMs, hardware security modules, then have at it. But the bottom line is you just don't drop it into a shared directory, obviously. You want to keep one backup of your key pair in a secured location. So that way, if something does happen where the server is brought down for other reasons, or the server comes down and crashes or has to be re-imaged, you have a backup of that key pair. Best PKI practices will say yes, but there's other practices that stem off that would say if something got compromised on that box, you should just be getting a new key pair anyway, right? Because you don't know how far without doing, paying for very expensive forensics to find out how far that exploit went. But again, generally, just in a perfect world, should I have a backup of my key pair? And the quick answer is yes. You should have one backup. Either the server admin or an enterprise administrator should be maintaining it in the back end in case something happens to the server where you need to re-implement.
Great, thank you.
No problem.
So another question that came in the case where the comment is getting feedback.
I can see the question out there if you're okay with that, Gina. I'll go ahead and read it off here as well. I just saw it come in. So the question was asked, if the common name is the same but the site is hosted on multiple servers, which certificates can be installed on multiple servers and which certificate requires separate certificates for each server? That's a great question because that is the real world, right? The real world is I might have an origin box where I'm putting my certificate on, and then I may be giving that same key pair to a hosting company that may distributing it, and that's my hard word for the day, across multiple VIPs inside another ecosystem. So that's a great point. So do I want to use the same key pair in both those examples? And for Dave who answered that question, again, you can just respond via chat saying, yes, that hits the mark or it doesn't. My recommendation would be you can use multiple certificates with the same common name, but you cannot, or you should not, I should say, not cannot, you should not use that exact same certificate in both ecosystems. Is the hosting provider or other company that might be doing it having ample protection there? Probably, and I would not doubt that they have ample levels of protection. But to be absolutely safe, if you had a box on your ecosystem and multiple boxes in another ecosystem, should I have unique key pairs there? Here's the way I would put it. Unless you can manage both those key pairs, it'd probably be best to have unique ones in both ecosystems. So not to sound facetious, but I would take a common sense approach. If I'm going to issue those certs out as a server admin, am I going to give that same key pair that I have here in an area that I probably can't manage? Do I want to have the same key pair in both areas? And the quick answer probably would be no, just because it'd be safer for you in the long term in case something happens in one of the other ecosystems where you might have to revoke or replace that key pair. So I hope that answers it for you. Again, if it doesn't, you can absolutely put it on here, and I can take that back and give you a deeper answer if you'd like.
Well, and I'll go ahead and add in there, I think that is also one of the differences as far as individual certificates. I had mentioned that is one of the delineation markers between the Symantec brand and the GeoTrust brand, is the server licensing issue coming in there. So looking at the Symantec brand, it is a certificate for each server that you are looking to install it upon, as opposed to on the GeoTrust brand, you can install that cert on multiple servers and not run afoul of the licensing agreement. And that brings into mind basically we offer a variety of SSL certs across the 3 different brands, and there are pros and cons to each of them. There are additional features that you get with some that you may not get with others. There may be some bottom dollar cost benefits to some that don't exist in others. So it really is taking a look at what you're trying to accomplish and how you're trying to do it, and the level of those additional features that you may want or need as you're looking to solve those questions for your enterprise.
Right. And again, I think if you don't mind, if I could extrapolate a little bit on the whole licensing thing. Some CAs don't license and some CAs do. And I'll tell you just from the Symantec perspective, being in the years that I've supported licensing and kind of saw it nurtured and change and work over the years. Licensing is not a technical term for those out there who have ran into that. Licensing sometimes goes back into kind of what I like to say a money-back guarantee kind of / insurance. So we offer it. Symantec offers it. When we say licensing, sometimes we'll say the number of web server instances that key pair is protecting or residing on. So if I have 5 servers in a cluster, 5 web server instances, my licensing is 5, even if I'm terminating at the reverse proxy or load balancer. But the underlying tone of that is saying that by telling Symantec I have 5 web server instances out there, if something happens to my public key because of something Symantec did, faulty algorithms, bad signing procedures, whatever, then Symantec kind of owes me money. There's monetary liability there that they provide to me. So that's sometimes why you see things being licensed, because there's, and I hate to say the word insurance because it kind of falls in there, it's quasi, it kind of falls in there, kind of doesn't, but it's kind of a level of assurance or insurance that we provide. It says, look, if something happens because of we did, then there's monetary liability we have to you. What that means in the bigger scheme is not a money-making scheme, of course. It's saying that, look, as a public CA, we're putting our money where our mouth is. We're putting our money into our processes, and that's why our processes are so stringent at the Symantec side. And again, this is not beating up on other CAs or trying to sell ours or anything. I'm just telling you in my years' experience being with the company, I'm pretty passionate about what we do here. I believe in it. I know it to be good processes from the VeriSign and now Symantec side. But that's something to remember when you hear those terms sometimes with licensing, and what it means is, like for us on the Symantec side, it means that there's a level of monetary guarantee we put to that. It's a really high level, actually, of guarantee, but it's a public document. But it's what we call our net sure protection. It's what protects the customer and the servers that public key can either reside on or protect in their ecosystem. And sometimes that's why you see licensing out there. But it all goes back to what CAs are doing, right? Because not all CAs are created equal. Some public CAs won't mandate it, and they'll have some kind of just quick guarantee. And again, I'm not downplaying it as good or bad or indifferent. But other CAs will say, look, we put some time and effort in the thought process. There's something we're giving you there that potentially can happen, and knock on wood, it never does. But, again, and it's never happened in my years at Symantec in the 15-plus years I've supported it. But, again, it's one of those, it's about a guarantee that we're providing, and that's why CAs sometimes ask it. But, again, that those CAs get sectioned or sectioned out about what level of authentication are they providing and things like that. And sometimes that's why you see the cost differentials between public CAs, because it's the level of authentication, it's the level of guarantee that you're getting, unfortunately, which, again, they're not all created equal. So anyway, just kind of dropped it out there for the sake of time.
And we need to go ahead and wrap this up and finish off. There was one other question that had come in asking about, yes?
Yeah, I think we'll have to answer that offline because we do have to wrap up. But thank you so much, Frank. Thank you, John. That was a really great presentation. I'd also like to thank everybody tuning in for your participation. As a reminder, we'll be sending out a follow-up email with a link to the webinar's presentation slides and a recording within the next couple of days. So be on the lookout for that email. That concludes our webinar for today. Thanks again for tuning in, and have a great day, everyone.